Take a deep breath, let your eyes grow heavier and your body a little softer. You're safe here now. The world outside can wait. Let the quiet of this moment wrap around you like a warm, velvety cloak. Feel the bed beneath you, the soft rise and fall of your breath. The stillness of the air, every sound around you grows distant, like waves pulling away from the shore. There's nothing left to do, no one to be. Only this story to carry you away. Now close your eyes and let's drift together. Our story begins on a night made of whispers and mist. The moon was veiled by slow-moving clouds, thick and soft like wool soaked in silver. The stars above the valley of Eldwine were hidden behind their curtain of smoke-colored sky, and that was exactly how they liked it. Down below, where the hills curved like the backs of sleeping giants, a line of riders emerged from the tree line. 5 horses dark as shadow, hoofbeats muffled by the damp moss of the old Roman road. They did not speak. Their cloaks, deep charcoal and forest green, fluttered gently in the cool breeze. At the front rode a woman tall, with an unspoken air of command. Her name was Lysara of the Hollow Wood. Lysara, the map keeper, the vow-breaker, the one whose touch could lift a key from a noble's belt without so much as a stir in the candle flame. She pulled her hood lower, eyes fixed on the soft glow ahead, the torchlit towers of Blackmere Keep. The keep was old, even by the reckoning of old men. Its stones were quarried in the time of kings who thought the world was flat, its library carved by monks who dipped their pens in golden ink. But it was not gold they came for tonight. They would take something rarer. Let your breath follow the rhythm of the horse's steps, step by step. Soft and even breathe in like the wind rolling over cool grass. Breathe out like the breath of the sleeping trees. As they approached the outer walls, Lysara raised her hand. The riders stopped. They were close enough now to hear the crackling of fire within the guardhouse, close enough to smell the warmth of flatbread baking on the stone oven. Even the guards, half drowsing, half drunk, had no reason to suspect what floated quietly toward them on Fog's back. A soft whistle, once, twice, from the west side. An answer. It was Rythe, the climber. He had already scaled the ivy-wrapped watchtower, slipping between the merlins like smoke, one by one. They moved, no rush, no sound beyond the brushing of cloaks and the occasional creak of leather. They had done this before, many times, but never here, never Blackmere. This place held not treasure of coin, but treasure of thought. Scrolls, parchments, letters between ancient kings and shadowy alchemists, secrets of how the northern barons once brewed fire from stone maps, not drawn to scale. But to memory, Lysara had read once that the human brain remembers best when it is quiet, and tonight, the world was listening. She reached the side entrance used long ago by kitchen servants and stable boys. The hinges were oiled by whom no one would say a quiet favor, paid long ago. The door opened with a gentle sigh, and the castle exhaled its warmth. Flickering torchlight, the scent of lavender and wax welcoming them in. Let yourself go with them. Imagine the heavy stone walls, the feel of cold flagstones beneath quiet boots, the hush of pages turning long ago, still echoing faintly in the air. The final lute had begun, and not a single sword had been drawn, just breath and silence and time. The first hallway welcomed them with a hush of slumbering stone. Tall columns lined the walls, carved with the forgotten sigils of old houses. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of old parchment and the quiet sweetness of lavender wax. Their footsteps fell gently on the worn flagstones. Even the faintest scuff was swallowed by the thick velvet drapes that hung between the stone archways. Everything in this place seemed to remember silence. Lysara moved first, her fingers brushing the walls as if reading a map only she could see. Behind her came Corrin, light on his feet, eyes darting in the half-shadows. He carried no weapon, only a leather satchel meant to hold what others might overlook: thin scrolls, brittle maps, letters tucked into forgotten cracks. A warm orange flicker glowed just ahead, a torch left burning low on a bracket in the wall, the kind of carelessness only comfort can cause. They paused beneath a narrow staircase winding upward. It was not their path. Their treasure lay below Rythe. Already inside had opened the inner gate. The old hinges had not squealed, though they groaned softly like a yawn in the dark. Beneath the main hall, the stone descended into a spiral. Each step rounded the heart of the keep. Curling downward like a sleeping serpent at the bottom waited a chamber long sealed from the breath of wind. It was once the abbey's scriptorium, now it served as the castle's hidden library. Here, no oil lamps flamed, no voices echoed. Only the faint sound of their breath and the rustling of their cloaks as they moved. Corrin lit a small lantern. Shielding it with a gloved hand, a soft golden glow revealed shelves carved directly from stone. Scrolls nestled in cubbies like sleeping birds. Books wrapped in cloth bindings leaned gently against one another. As if in quiet conversation, they spread out. Lysara moved toward a wall covered in script too faded to read. Her fingers traced the edges of the sandstone. Stopping where a loose block met her palm, she pressed inward. A section of the shelf gave way, revealing a shallow compartment inside. Wrapped in red velvet lay a scroll sealed with black wax. She did not open it, not here. Rythe was already at the opposite side of the room, crouched low beside a cask lined with metal. He lifted its lid with care and revealed a stack of papers bound in iron rings. Their title was inked in 3 languages, one known. Too long-lost Corrin had begun reading aloud softly, his voice barely above the rhythm of breathing. These are letters written by Lord Hawthorne to the alchemist Valric the Bent. He speaks of a flame that burns beneath water. Lysara gave a small nod. She had suspected as much. Legends told of the Blackmere flame, a substance stored below the keep for centuries. It was said to burn blue, to roar without heat, and to whisper in the voice of those long dead. It was not fire they sought, but the truth within it. The chamber welcomed them like it knew why they had come. Every parchment, every curl of ink, every crack in the shelf waited to be found, as if memory itself had curled up in these corners to sleep, hoping someone would finally ask what it had seen. You can imagine the feeling there, the air so still. It pressed softly on their skin. The scent of ink, old dust, and stone, warmed by time. The lantern's flame swaying gently, its light dancing along the walls. It was the kind of quiet where thoughts begin to echo, where secrets rise like steam from the earth. And in that stillness, Lysara smiled, because this was not theft, it was recovery, and the keep, with all its heavy walls and hidden chambers, did not resist. The lantern's glow shimmered across the parchment as Lysara unrolled the scroll. She still hadn't broken the seal. That would wait until they were far from the walls, back beneath the tree line, where only the wind could listen. But her hands, trained by years of quiet work and even quieter wonder, recognized the weight of what she held. Not treasure, not gold, but memory pressed into paper and locked away for centuries. Corrin moved behind her, eyes wide with that familiar mix of fear and awe. He did not ask what was inside. He knew better instead. He held out a folded square of silk. Lysara placed the scroll gently atop it and wrapped it twice, sealing it with a simple twine knot. No need for more. Nothing about this moment was rushed. Across the chamber, Rythe's fingers ran over the stone wall behind the metal-bound casket. It was marked, though barely visible in the low light, an old carving, faded lines, drawn in the shape of a circle with 4 inward spirals. He tapped it gently with the hilt of his blade. A dull thud, then another, and then a hollow sound. The stone there was false. They gathered close, the 3 of them now, each lit from below by the lantern's golden warmth, their faces calm, their movements slow, as if the air itself were thick with sleep. Lysara pressed her palm to the circle and twisted. Just slightly, a quiet click answered her touch. The stone panel loosened inside. There was no passage, only a small cavity, no larger than a chest. And within, a folded map etched onto thin plates of copper, bound with braided leather and sealed in beeswax. Corrin took it gently. He placed it in his satchel as if it were glass. They all knew what it was, the map to the arched caverns. Long thought to be myth, said to hold texts not written with ink, but carved into living rock by monks who had taken a vow of silence so strict. Even their writings hummed instead of spoke. The keep had given them more than they hoped for, but now came the most delicate part of the night. Leaving without being seen, leaving without the keep realizing what had been taken. As they moved back up the stone stairs, each step carried care. Every creak, every shift of weight was placed with the precision of dancers in a forgotten waltz. At the top, Rythe signaled first. The hallway above was clear. The guard still snored beside the fire, his head tipped back, mouth open, dreaming whatever dreams come to those who live their lives behind gates. They crossed one at a time. Corrin, then Lysara, then Rythe last, pausing only to pull the heavy curtain back across the scriptorium stairwell. The door closed behind them with no sound at all outside. The wind had picked up just slightly. It brushed along the edge of the keep like fingers across a harp string, and the trees at the edge of the road swayed gently, as if bowing in approval. They did not run. There was no need. The night was still theirs. They passed beneath the shadow of the outer wall and followed the slope down toward the old orchard, past the line of thorny hedges once grown to keep animals in. Now only wild foxes and field mice made their homes there. Lysara paused just once to look back. The towers of Black Mirror stood silent and still, glowing faintly in the low moonlight, a place of secrets, of history, and now of loss. But it was not a cruel loss. It was gentle, like a memory finally released from the mind that held it too long. They disappeared into the forest's edge, the mist curling around them like smoke from an unseen fire, and the keep stood as it had always stood, silent still, and unaware of what it had quietly given away. The forest embraced them like an old friend. Branches overhead moved gently in the breeze, casting slow shadows that drifted across the mossy ground. Owls whispered from high nests, and the wind rustled the leaves in a hush too soft to disturb even the most timid of sleepers. Lysara led them down a path known only to those who walked without light. It was narrow, wrapped in vines, and bent with the weight of old trees that had stood since before the keep itself was built. Each step was taken with care. Boots pressing softly into the damp soil, Corrin walked just behind her, the satchel secure against his side. He held it close, not from fear, but reverence. He could feel the weight of the copper map through the cloth. It was like holding time itself, etched in lines no storm could erase. Rythe brought up the rear, his blade sheathed, his eyes constantly sweeping the edge of the woods. He trusted the darkness more than the open plains. Darkness, after all, does not betray unless provoked. They moved in silence, not because they feared pursuit, but because the night asked it of them. In the distance, a brook whispered over stone. Its voice was soft, like lullabies sung by grandmothers long forgotten, the kind that lived only in dreams and stories told by firelight. When they reached the stream, Lysara knelt beside it. She dipped her hands in the cool water. Letting it wash over her fingers, it carried the taste of pine and the faint mineral tang of mountain snow mold. She drank slowly, then passed the water skin to Corrin. He drank, then offered it to Rythe. The ritual was small, but familiar. It reminded them that no matter what they carried, maps, secrets, names the body still needed tending. Once they were refreshed, they moved again. The path widened slightly, opening into a grove lit by a shaft of pale moonlight. It fell in a perfect circle upon the earth, touching the moss with silver and making the air shimmer. Like breath in cold winter, they paused there. This place had always been sacred to them, not by any church, not by any blessing, but by memory. It was the first place they had gathered together as a group, the first time they had looked at one another and said yes. We steal, but only what was taken first. Rythe sat down against an old elm and let out a slow breath. His eyes scanned the treetops, half expecting some sign of watching birds or trickster stars, But the sky above was quiet. Lysara unfolded a small cloth from her pack. Inside was a sliver of bread, dried fruit, and a bit of salted cheese, simple food. But it tasted richer here beneath the leaves, under the honest moon. They ate quietly, without need for words, each bite grounding them, reminding them that they were still of this world, still bound to breath, to heartbeat, to earth. Corrin reached into his satchel and pulled out the copper map. He held it under the moonlight, watching how the lines caught the silver glow. The braided leather seal had not been broken. Lysara leaned forward. With her small knife, she cut the knot with care and peeled back the wax edge. The map unfolded in silence. There were no words upon it, only curves, deep-etched lines and symbols none of them recognized fully. It did not show roads or rivers or names, but it spoke of depth, of shape, of places within the land. Not atop it, Rythe tilted his head. "It's a map of beneath," he said quietly. "Of what's under our feet, not what lies ahead." Lysara nodded. "The arched caverns," she whispered. "Not drawn, remembered." Corrin traced one spiral on the lower edge. His finger paused over a symbol shaped like a teardrop within a flame. He shivered. Though the night was not cold, the map, like the scroll, was more than it seemed, not just a guide, but a key. And beneath this forest, beneath the stone and soil, something old waited to be found. The map rested between them as the wind passed gently overhead, stirring the treetops but never reaching the earth below. It was a stillness too complete to be natural, not heavy or dark, but ancient, like the hush inside a cathedral long since abandoned. Lysara sat with her back straight, eyes on the map, but her mind drifting between memory and possibility. She had heard rumors, once tales told by spice traders in the east, that beneath certain forests, trees grew atop more than roots. They grew above archives, not books or scrolls, but messages written in stone, in pattern and placement, buried long before parchment ever held ink. Corrin turned the map slowly, watching the spiral paths line up with the moss-rimmed grove they now sat in. "You think it starts here?" he asked, voice low and thick with wonder. "No," Lysara answered. "I think it continues here." Rythe stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. He pressed his foot into the earth, then knelt, brushing away leaves and needles to expose the dirt beneath. It felt loose, softer than it should have been. He pulled a small tool from his belt and began to dig, not deep, just carefully. After a few minutes, he struck something hard. Not rock stone, yes, but shaped. He cleared it further to reveal a round edge, too smooth and too perfect to be natural evering. Embedded in a carved slab of gray slate, Lysara came beside him and crouched. Together they uncovered the stone, and the seal pressed into its surface a flame, a tear, and above it all, the silhouette of a mountain turned upside down. Corrin joined them, holding the copper map side by side with the symbol. It was the same. Rythe slipped his fingers into the iron ring and pulled it, resisted at first, as though time itself gripped the seal. Then, with a breath of earth and a soft groan, the stone lifted beneath was a narrow shaft, lined with old wood and blackened roots. A ladder descended into the dark, each rung bound with iron, each rail slick with the damp breath of centuries. No one spoke. There was no need. Lysara lit a small lantern, the flame no brighter than a candle in a monk's cell. She went first. The air inside the shaft was cool and damp. It carried the scent of forgotten things, stone dust, dried moss, and the memory of fire long since burned out. Her boots touched down on the floor of a chamber carved beneath the grove. It was small, circular, and filled with silence that felt older than words. The walls were covered in carvings, layer upon layer of ancient script. Spirals, shapes, and symbols that looped and wound around each other like vines. Corrin descended next. Followed by Rythe, they stood in the quiet together, the lantern's glow catching tiny flecks of metal embedded in the stone. "These aren't just markings," Corrin whispered. "They're aligned." He turned slowly, letting his eyes follow the lines as they curled around the chamber. "It's a memory." written into the walls. Lysara moved toward the far edge where the carvings grew tighter. Denser, her fingers traced a line of dots, some wide, others so small they seemed like pinpricks. Then she saw it, a hollow, square-shaped, just the size of the scroll she had taken from the keep. She unwrapped it and slid it into place. A faint click echoed through the floor, and then a sound like breathing stones. The walls began to shift. Not with motion, but with glow. The markings lit faintly, lines of silver and blue running through the carvings like veins catching moonlight. It pulsed once, then stilled. The room had awakened. What was hidden beneath the keep had found its mirror in the earth. And the final loot was not treasure taken, it was a door gently opened. The glow from the walls faded to a soft shimmer, like the last glint of a dying star. But the change it brought remained. The air in the chamber was warmer now, subtly so, as if some long-forgotten breath had returned to the space. Stirred from centuries of slumber, Lysara stepped back from the wall, her heart steady, though a quiet awe swelled in her chest. This place had not resisted them. It had received them, not with hostility, but with trust. Corrin turned slowly in the center of the chamber, watching how the patterns of light curved along the stone. "They've aligned it to the stars," he whispered. "The chamber, it's a map too, isn't it?" Rythe nodded without speaking. He knelt and pressed his palm against the floor. Feeling for vibration, there was none, not yet. But he could feel something deeper, something stillness couldn't hide. Lysara raised the lantern again and stepped into the archway that had appeared behind the carvings. It had not opened like a door. It had revealed itself when the scroll had been placed. The lines of silver parting gently to outline the frame. The corridor beyond sloped downward, not steeply, but steadily. The air grew cooler once more, not with decay, but with age. The kind of age that folds around time like a cloak. They moved slowly, feet brushing the smooth stone beneath. It felt untouched, clean, preserved by the sheer discipline of silence as they walked. They passed markings etched deeper into the wall spirals, interlocked with teardrops, glyphs that bent like reeds in wind. There were no torches, no lamps, but their lantern flickered just enough to carry them forward. Then, far below, they heard a sound, faint as a whisper through feathers. It was not wind, it was not water, it was music. A low hum, not sung by a voice, but by the earth itself. The pitch wavered like heat above stone, vibrating gently through the soles of their boots. It was calming, not eerie. A lullaby carried from the bones of the world. Lysara paused at the next chamber's mouth here. The path widened into a grand space, vaulted and round, with high walls lost in darkness. In the center stood a basin of stone, filled with what looked like liquid silver, but it gave no reflection, only soft light. Like moonlight filtered through a dream. Corrin approached it slowly. The humming grew louder, not unpleasant, not urgent, just clearer, as if it recognized them. Lysara leaned over the basin and saw nothing below its surface. Yet somehow, she felt it looking back, not with eyes, but with memory. "This is it," she said quietly. The flame. Not fire, not heat, but memory made fluid energy that did not burn, but remembered. It was the Blackmere flame. Rythe drew a small vial from his cloak, the glass stained from years of careful gathering. He lowered it into the basin and let the silver light pour in slowly. The vial filled without weight, without heat, and as he sealed it, the hum soft again, almost like a sigh of acceptance. They had not taken it. They had accepted its offering. Lysara turned to the others, her voice barely more than breath. "We leave now, quietly. Let it rest again." Corrin nodded, still watching the light ripple across the chamber walls. Rythe slipped the vial into a padded pocket over his heart. They returned the way they came, up the sloped path, through the awakened room, into the grove now shrouded in mist and moonlight once more. Behind them, the chamber's glow faded. The stone slid gently back into place. The forest breathed again above ground. The world had not changed, but below, in a place where silence reigned, something ancient had stirred, and it had chosen to trust the final loot was never gold, never silver. It was the quiet flame of memory, and it now lived within them. The forest was quieter than before, not because it slept deeper, but because something within it had settled, as if the very trees had witnessed the exchange below and agreed to keep the secret. Their leaves rustled gently, but their roots did not speak. Lysara led the trio through the narrow path once again, the copper map now tucked safely beneath her cloak. The vial, containing the memory flame, rested against Rythe's chest. Each of them walked with care, but not haste. There was no chase behind them, only quiet. The moon had shifted in the sky, no longer hidden, but glowing gently between scattered clouds. Its light filtered through the canopy in soft beams, guiding them like lanterns held by unseen hands. They passed a tree marked with 3 horizontal slashes, an old signal from years ago. It meant the river was close, and where the river bent, a boat waited. Corrin was the first to reach the riverbank. The water was smooth, black like silk, moving slowly beneath the reflection of stars. Tethered to a half-buried post was a small, flat-bottomed boat, its hull worn but sturdy. Rythe untied the rope and stepped inside. Testing the weight, it rocked gently, but held. One by one, they climbed in. The lantern dimmed and set low in the center. The boat drifted without oars at first, letting the current take them. Only the quiet lap of water against wood filled the silence now. Corrin leaned back, his eyes half closed. He could still hear the hum from below, not in his ears, but in his bones. The memory of a song never heard. Only felt. Lysara rested her hand on the copper-bound map, even through the leather. It pulsed faintly with warmth. It was not magic. It was not curse. It was a story, an old one, and now it had new keepers. They floated downriver for over an hour, letting the bends guide them. Now and then, a fox watched from the shore, an owl passed overhead. But the world gave no alarm. At a small outcrop of stone, where a willow tree leaned over the water like a sleepy guardian, they stopped. Rythe stepped out first, steadying the boat as the others followed. Their camp was nearby, nestled between rocks and ferns. They had left nothing behind when they entered the keep. But now they laid out blankets, poured water from skin to cup, and finally let themselves rest. No one spoke of what they'd done, not yet. The fire they lit was small, shielded by stones. Dawn crept softly into the forest, not with brilliance, but with a cool hush that nudged the mist gently from the trees. The first light did not pierce. It caressed long shadows stretched and yawned across the mossy ground. As if the very forest was waking slowly with them, Lysara stirred first. She blinked into the soft gray morning and listened. The fire had died to warm embers. Birdsong had not yet begun. Only the whisper of leaves in the wind greeted her. She sat up and looked at the vial resting beside the scroll. The liquid within still shimmered faintly, though its glow had calmed, as if it too had slept. Corrin was already awake, sitting with his knees pulled close, sketching quietly in a journal. He wasn't recording the map. He was drawing the grove, the way the trees had looked when they returned from the underground chamber. The light, the mist, the silence. It felt like the forest knew, he said, not looking up. It knew what we carried. Lysara nodded. The earth remembers. She whispered. Rythe approached from the edge of the camp, his boots silent on the damp ground. He had been walking the perimeter, as he always did, not for danger, but for change. He crouched beside the low embers and stirred them gently with a twig. Tiny sparks rose into the air, lifting like stars, returning to their sky. No tracks, he murmured. No sound but ours. It's like we were never here. That's the way it should be, Lysara said. They packed in silence, no need for talk. Every gesture was practice. Folding cloaks, wrapping the scroll, patting the vial and layered cloth. By the time the sun had reached the treetops, they were already on the move again. The path they chose was not the same as the one they had come by. It curled eastward, along a ridgeline thick with ferns and pine below. The forest fell into steep valleys where mists drifted like rivers. Corrin paused once to mark a tree, not with a knife, but with chalk, a symbol from the scroll. A spiral inside a crescent moon, if another ever came this way. It would be a guide or a warning, or perhaps both. They walked for hours. The land changed slowly beneath their feet. Forests gave way to more to rolling grass speckled with stone, and in the distance, rising like the back of a sleeping beast, the Hill of Weavers appeared. It was a place few visited anymore. Long ago, they said women with eyes like storm clouds would sit at its peak and spin silver thread from the wind. No proof remained, only stories. But that's what they followed, now stories and the truths wrapped inside them. They reached the base of the hill by late afternoon. The grass waved like water in the breeze. A single standing stone leaned there, etched with weathered runes, its shadow pointing toward the summit. They did not speak. They climbed step by step, with the sun behind them and the forest far below. They reached the top. There was no shrine, no marker, only wind, but in the center of the crest, 3 stones formed a perfect triangle. Not natural, not random. Lysara knelt and placed the scroll in the center. She did not unroll it. She did not speak to it. She simply left it there, covered with a cloth tied with a black thread beside it. Rythe laid the vial tucked safely beneath flat stones, hidden from sun and rain. They did not bury it. They left it exposed bare, but veiled to be found only if sought. They stood together, wind brushing their cloaks, their shadows long behind them. And then they turned and walked away, not as thieves, not as seekers, but as those who carry memory for now. The loot was complete, but its story had just begun. The descent from the Hill of Weavers was slow, peaceful. No urgency pulled at their steps. No fear chased them from behind. It was as though the land itself had softened their wake. The grass seemed quieter beneath their feet. The wind carried no questions. Lysara walked slightly ahead, her fingers brushing the ends of wild heather as they passed. She had always known that some stories weren't meant to be kept. They were meant to be carried and then placed gently back into the world. Corrin followed in silence, a new journal tucked under his arm. The old one, the one with the map sketches. The grove, the chamber had been left beside the scroll and vial, not hidden, just resting where they now belonged. Rythe lingered at the rear. He watched the mist rising in the far valleys, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but in remembrance. He had seen fog like that before years ago, on another path, on another kind of night. As they reached the tree line once more, the forest welcomed them again with swaying branches and drifting. Pine-scent birdsong had returned, a soft chorus that accompanied their steps like an unseen choir. Then Lysara paused ahead. At the bend in the trail stood a figure, tall, still wrapped in a traveler's cloak the color of ash. The figure did not move, did not speak. Lysara raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. They did. Without sound, the figure simply turned, stepped off the path, and disappeared behind the trees, not like a ghost, but like someone who knew the trail better than they did. No threat, no fear. Just presence. They waited, listening, but nothing stirred. Corrin stepped forward slowly, scanning the trees. I think, he whispered, they were waiting for something, or watching to see if we would come out with fire. Rythe said, but we didn't. Lysara smiled faintly. No, we came out with silence. And the forest seemed to agree. They walked on, winding now along the lower trails, deeper into regions few maps recorded. There were villages ahead, places where tea was poured without questions and coins were not always needed. They would stay hidden for a while, but stories have wings, and someone would eventually follow the signs, the spiral carved in chalk, the cloth tied with black thread, the hum left behind in the bones of stone. It would not be a race. It would be a calling. Lysara, Corrin, and Rythe walked until dusk. Then they found a clearing with soft moss and wide trees and no name. They made no fire. They simply lay down beneath a sky turning violet with stars, and as they drifted into sleep, the forest whispered gently above them. the leaves repeating a phrase only the wind could understand. You did not take. You returned. And so it let them rest. Morning arrived wrapped in mist and birdsong. The forest, now familiar, seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted not from the trees, but from the silence they held so tightly for so long. Lysara rose slowly, her cloak damp from the dew, her breath misting in the crisp air. She didn't speak, not yet. Instead, she stood still and listened. The world was quiet, but not empty. Corrin sat nearby, sharpening a piece of charcoal, sketchbook already open in his lap. He was drawing the figure they'd seen the day before, not clearly, but from memory: a cloak, the posture, the way the fog curled behind them like smoke. Rythe was already at the stream, rinsing their cups and filling skins with cold, clean water. He glanced up as she approached and offered a short nod, no words needed. They ate little that morning, just dried fruit and a few bites of oatcake, enough to move forward. Nothing more as they packed to leave. Lysara reached into a small inner pocket and drew out something she hadn't shared before, a letter old edges frayed. But the ink still bold as the night it was written. She had found it tucked behind a loose brick in the scriptorium wall. Not in a sealed case, not in a hidden box, just waiting, almost openly. As if it knew someone would someday care enough to look, she held it now by the edges, careful not to disturb the fragile fold. Then, slowly, she read it aloud. Whoever finds this, I leave what I could not carry. Not because I feared its weight, but because I feared forgetting why it mattered. If you take it, remember this. It was never meant to be owned, only witnessed. Corrin looked up, a quiet breath leaving his chest. Rythe said nothing, but he stepped closer and listened with his whole stillness. Lysara folded the letter again, then tucked it between two stones at the edge of their fire ring, a place where time would either destroy it or hide it again for the next listener. Then they walked out of the woods, past the glens, over low hills where sheep grazed and wind carried the scent of lavender. By midday, they reached a village. It was small stone houses, low roofs, and a bell that had not rung in years. The people were kind, and they asked no questions. Lysara traded a length of wool for bread. Corrin offered herbs for a pot of honey. Rythe fixed a gate and was given a pouch of dried apples in return. That night, they stayed in a cottage by the edge of the fields. A woman named Marin offered them a place to sleep beside the hearth, and in the warmth of fire and wool. They rested again, not as travelers, not as thieves, but as keepers of a truth that had chosen them. A truth sealed in copper, held in flame, and now woven into the quiet of their breath. The morning bells did not ring. They hadn't in years, not since the village smith passed on and the rope frayed from seasons of disuse. But something in the air carried the shape of a bell's echo, a silence so still it felt like the pause after a tone-soft, long, and expectant. Lysara stepped outside before the sun had fully risen. The sky was the color of worn parchment, and the fields beyond the stone wall shimmered with dew. A few early birds called out, their song clear in the cool hush. She held the copper map in her hands, not to study, but to listen. There was no sound from it, no hum, but somehow the air felt aligned. Corrin joined her, holding 2 cups of tea Marin had prepared. Steam curled from the surface like tendrils of mist, warming their fingers as they stood beside the wall. You think this is a stop, Corrin said, softly, or a start? Lysara smiled gently. Maybe both. Behind them, Rythe emerged carrying their packs. He had already checked the paths beyond the village, safe, still quiet, still theirs. They didn't speak of the scroll or the flame now. It was too near to speak aloud. Like a dream that fades when named. As they walked through the village, a child stepped from behind a doorframe and watched them pass. She had eyes like polished river stones, dark, curious, bright. She said nothing, but her gaze followed Lysara at the edge of the village. The path curved again, this time toward the highlands. Beyond lay old cairns, forgotten wells, and places where the grass grew in circular patches for no reason the farmers could explain. Corrin paused at a signpost with 3 arrows. One pointed back to the village, one toward the trade road, the last unlabeled pointed uphill. Toward the mists, he smiled and touched the post once with his fingers. Then they tipped the path upward hours passed. The sun moved gently across the sky, light and clouds exchanging soft greetings as the hills rolled out before them. Occasionally, they saw ruins in the distance, remnants of towers, bits of wall, shapes lost in the overgrowth. None of them called out. They knew the rhythm now. Step, listen, breathe. They came to a meadow near dusk. A ring of stones, long flattened by time, surrounded a worn circle of earth where nothing grew. No grass, no moss, just soil. Untouched dark, waiting. They set camp nearby. There was no fire this time, only the warmth of cloaks and the sky full of stars. Lysara placed the copper map in the center of the circle, not to read, just to let it rest. Corrin sat beside her, arms crossed loosely over his knees. "Do you ever think," he whispered, "that some stories aren't meant to be found?" Lysara didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the breeze shifted then, and from the stones around them came a sound not loud, not sharp a tone, like a bell, struck from beneath the earth, faint, echoing long, not a warning, a welcome. The earth remembered them, and it had more to share. The bell's soft echo faded, but the feeling it left behind remained a gentle weight in the chest, like being called by name in a dream. The 3 sat quietly in the stone ring, the copper map resting in the center like a forgotten relic that had remembered its purpose. Lysara reached out, not to move the map, but to trace the edge of the circle beneath it. Her fingers brushed the soil dry, but not dead. Something pulsed below, not alive in the way hearts are, alive in the way memory is. Rythe stood slowly, scanning the stones surrounding them. Each one was placed with care. Perhaps centuries ago. No carvings remained, only placement geometry older than names. Corrin leaned over the copper map, tilting it slightly in the lantern glow. The lines on its surface, etched and layered, seemed to shimmer again. Just faintly, he noticed something he hadn't before, a ring around the edge, not drawn but pressed, a symbol of a circle, surrounded by smaller notches. 13. Precisely, he looked up. There were 13 stones around them. "This map," he whispered, "isn't of a place, it's of a moment." Lysara nodded slowly. "It guides not where to go, but when to open." The sun dipped fully below the horizon now, and with it, the temperature fell, the stars above sharpened. Clear and watching, she reached into her cloak and drew a small piece of cloth. Unwrapping it slowly, within was the black thread from the scroll's binding, unraveled now, still soft. She tied one end around the copper map, gently securing it to the center of the circle. As the cloth touched the ground, a faint glow spread outward in all directions. It followed invisible lines drawn not on the soil. But beneath it, the stones around them hummed low, even steady, and the earth between them began to breathe. It didn't open with a crack. There was no sudden shift, only a slow, soft sinking. As if the circle was exhaling after a very long time, the map lowered into the earth by a hand they could not see, and beneath it, a stairway revealed itself, stone smooth, descending into the quiet below. No torch was needed. The walls glowed with the same pale shimmer they had seen in the chamber beneath the keep. Without speaking, they stood. Lysara stepped first, then Corrin, then Rythe. One by one, they disappeared into the warm hush below the ring of stones. The stairway narrowed and curved, not steep, but constant, and with each step, the sound changed from wind to stillness to something like voices layered, distant, unspoken. The voices weren't speaking now, they were remembering, and as they descended, the 3 travelers felt something familiar return to them. Not fear, not excitement, but belonging, as though they had finally come to the place the scroll had promised, the place the flame had reflected, the place memory had been waiting for, and the silence welcomed them in. The stairway curled like a ribbon of stone through time. It led them not just downward, but inward, Each step took them further from the world above and deeper into a space where time no longer hurried. The air in the chamber was warm not from fire, but from the hum of stories resting in their sleep. As they reached the bottom, the stone gave way to polished floor, smooth not by hands, but by centuries of stillness. The room before them was vast and round. Its walls were wrapped in soft, glowing veins of mineral light, like frozen lightning frozen inside mountain bone. In the center stood a pedestal of dark wood, old, uncarved, yet whole. Upon it rested a single object. Not a treasure, not a crown, not even a scroll, but a book wrapped in silk as pale as moonlight. Untouched by dust, Lysara stepped forward, her footsteps silent on the stone. She looked down at the book without reaching for it. There was no title, no seal, just presence. Corrin circled slowly around the room, his eyes following the patterns in the stone walls. He traced one with his fingertips and felt warmth, not heat, but memory. Images flickered in his mind, not visions, but feelings. A cradle made of oak, a tower built from red stone, a voice once beloved. Humming in the dark, Rythe remained by the stairwell, his hand resting on the wall. Listening, there was no threat here, but still he watched. Always the watcher, Lysara finally placed both hands gently on the silk-wrapped book. The silk unraveled on its own, not in haste, but like petals opening at dawn beneath. The cover was dark leather so smooth. It seemed to ripple like water when touched by the light. She opened it. No words greeted her instead. The pages revealed pressed symbols, embedded in faint gold. Each one was unfamiliar, yet deeply known, like a song you'd never heard. But already remember. Corrin approached. He looked down at the first page, then the second. It's written in story, he whispered, not language, not letters. Rythe stepped closer now. Even he, who rarely spoke of what he felt, was quiet with reverence. Lysara turned another page, and the chamber pulsed gently, like the exhale of a sleeping forest. The book was not just a record. It was a bridge, a memory carried by the keep, by the grove, by the flame, and now by them. And as she read silently, the room seemed to lean inward, not to trap them, but to listen, because for the first time in hundreds of years, someone was reading again, someone was remembering, and so the chamber, wrapped in stillness and shimmer, allowed the stories to wake. Lysara turned the pages slowly, her fingers brushing each one with care. The symbols shimmered faintly, as though sensing her attention, not glowing, not enchanted, just quietly alive. Each page told a feeling. Not an event, not a date, but the weight of what had been. Corrin leaned in close. Eyes soft, he did not try to read. He listened not with ears, but with breath. The way one listens to wind through tall grass, or water curling around river stones. One page made the air taste like copper. Another carried the scent of fresh ink and pine smoke. Yet another made Lysara's chest tighten, as though holding back tears that did not belong to her. This book, she whispered, does not tell stories, it remembers them. And as she said the words aloud, the chamber responded. From the walls, faint patterns began to glow, curved like vines, steady like constellations. The light rose softly, like fireflies drifting through twilight. And then, from the stone behind the pedestal, something shifted. A shape emerged, not from shadow, but from stillness. It was a figure wearing robes, a hood drawn low. No face, just a sense of presence, like a song too quiet to hear, but too deep to ignore. The figure stepped forward and bowed its head once to Lysara, not in greeting, but in recognition. She did not speak. She simply held the book in both hands and bowed in return. Corrin stepped back. Breath caught. Rythe stood completely still. Though his hand did not reach for a weapon, the figure extended one arm. Its fingers wrapped in linen. It did not touch the book. It only pointed to the next page. Lysara opened it. This page shimmered more brightly than the rest. Its lines curved not just across the parchment, but seemed to float above it. They moved gently, like a story still being written. Then the figure raised its other hand and held it over the pedestal. A single drop of light fell from its palm, It landed on the open page. The chamber exhaled. Soft wind curled around the trio. The pedestal lowered slowly, taking the book with it. The walls dimmed, and the figure stepped back, not vanishing, just blending again into the stillness like a candle lowered into water. The pedestal disappeared into the floor, and the chamber grew still once more. The page had been sealed, not with wax, but with presence. Lysara turned to Corrin and Rythe, her voice steady. We were never meant to take it away. We were meant to bring it here, to complete it. And they understood their journey had not been to steal or to hide. It had been to carry it close, to let memory find its resting place, and in doing so, to let the silence begin again. The chamber around them now felt different, not brighter, not louder, but whole. The air was the same, yet lighter, as though a sigh long held for centuries had finally been released. They stood in a stillness that didn't ask them to speak. It wrapped around them gently, like a warm woolen blanket left out beside the hearth. Lysara stepped back from the pedestal space. The book now gone, returned to wherever memory keeps its deepest treasures. She let her hands fall to her sides. Feeling the last echo of the story in her fingertips, Corrin looked once more at the walls. The light there had faded again, but he could still see the faint paths the symbols had drawn, as if they'd been carved not into stone, but into air, and the air remembered. Rythe moved toward the stairwell, but paused. He turned, facing the center of the room one last time, and in the softest voice he had spoken in years, he whispered, "Thank you." The walls did not answer, but the hush deepened. As though accepting the words with grace, the three of them climbed the steps in silence. No hurry, no sound but the soft brush of their boots against stone. When they emerged once more into the circle of standing stones, the stars were still above them. The sky remained dark, but not cold. It was the kind of night that held you gently. Instead of pressing down, Lysara looked back once the stairway had already vanished. The copper map was gone. Only the 13 stones remained, tall and silent, and watching Corrin took a piece of chalk from his pocket. He drew a small spiral near the base of one stone, not to mark it for others, but as a note to the world, a quiet message. Here, memory sleeps in peace. They moved beyond the circle, into the tall grass once more. The path ahead was not marked, but they did not need signs anymore. They carried direction within them now, not where to go, but why they walked down the hill past the forest. Along a road where the only sound was the breeze, villagers who passed them in days to come would never know who they were, just travelers, just quiet figures on a winding path. But sometimes, when the wind changed or the bells stirred, a child would stop and say, "I think they were listening to the ground." And they'd be right. Because once, in a place beneath the world, a story was placed into the hands of silence, and those who heard it did not keep it for themselves. They gave it back, and the dust still remembers their footsteps. By the time the trio reached the lower valleys, the sky had begun to turn silver blue. Morning light spilled softly over distant hills, painting their edges with warmth and promise. The world felt new, not because it had changed, but because they had. They came upon a meadow that opened wide like a quiet breath. The grass swayed gently, kissed by wind and scattered with dew like tiny lanterns of light. At its center stood a willow tree, older than any road, its branches trailing like soft curtains. They stopped there, not to rest, but to feel Lysara sat with her back against the trunk. The bark warm from the sun's first touch. Corrin lay in the tall grass beside her, sketchbook unopened, content just to be Rythe remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the sky. "I've always liked willows," Lysara murmured. "They don't reach upward like they're trying to escape the earth. They just bow like they're listening." Corrin smiled, not answering. The wind shifted again, not strong, just enough to stir the grass and lift a strand of her hair from her face. Rythe finally moved to sit beside them for the first time since they left the keep. He removed his gloves. His hands were calloused, scarred, but still. They held gentleness. He pressed his palms into the ground, and the earth responded not in sound, not in shimmer, but in peace. The meadow felt like a memory, not theirs, older but open, as if something had once passed through here. A whisper, a procession, a farewell, and left behind the sun of time. Lysara reached into her satchel and drew out the final item they had carried, a tiny glass orb. No larger than a sparrow's egg, it held no magic, only air. But the air inside had been captured in the chamber beneath the keep, still sacred. She placed it gently at the base of the willow, covered it with a handful of soft moss, then pressed her hand over it. A slow breath left her lips. Corrin looked at her. "Was that the last of it?" She nodded. "We kept what needed keeping, now we give what needs returning." They stayed under the willow for hours, letting the wind pass over them, letting the silence speak. Birds came, left, returned again. The sun rose higher, the warmth grew, and still they rested. Not asleep, but between story and silence, between memory and mourning. When they finally stood, none of them looked back. They didn't need to, because the wind had been watching and it would remember. They followed no map now, no road marked their journey, only the gentle turnings of the land and the sound of their own quiet footsteps in the grass. The villages they passed were distant. Sometimes they saw smoke from chimneys curling above treetops. Sometimes the faint ring of hammers or the chatter of shepherds, but they didn't stop. There was nothing more to hide, nothing more to find. Their journey had never been about the treasure. It had been about where the treasure led them, at the edge of a wide plateau. They came to a high cliff that overlooked the sea. Waves rolled below in slow rhythm, brushing the shore like hands, smoothing a memory. The sun, now low in the west, turned the water to gold. Lysara stood with her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, not from cold, but from a sense of completion. Corrin knelt near the cliff's edge, sketching the horizon, not to capture it, but to understand it. Rythe remained just behind, eyes soft, one hand resting over the heart of his chest, as though he still felt the hum of the flame. The map, the vault beneath the stones. No one spoke, because they had given everything voice already, to the scroll, to the silence, to the chamber that had remembered them. They watched the sun set. The sky burned rose and amber, then cooled to blue and indigo. One star appeared, alone, then two, then dozens more, until the sky was a sea of quiet fire and still. The three remained, not because they waited, but because they listened to the waves, to the wind, to the world, no longer watching them, because now they were no longer part of his story. They were simply people again, people who had returned something sacred and had been changed by it. Corrin finally set down his sketchbook. Lysara turned her eyes from the stars to the sea. Rythe exhaled deeply and closed his eyes. And in that moment, the wind carried one final whisper past them, not from below, not from the past, but from the place where memory rests once it has finished speaking. It said nothing, but they all heard it, and in that stillness, in that vast, endless hush, they let the journey end, not with a word, not with a step, but with peace.